Welcome to the Serenaders Lounge. You all will be seated at the table of narration. We will be reading a story by poet Katrina McCain. The title of this wonderful tale, Fragile Love with Glass Affections, narrated by the poet B.GKL. Please dim the lights and enjoy the story. I woke up with hazy, glazed eyes and wondered exactly where I was before the ache in my heart reminded me of the recent events I wanted to forget. The weight of lies and deception rested heavily in the middle of my chest, and I did not want to move or breathe or think or feel. There is no way I've been receiving fragile love with glass affections for a year now. How can something so beautiful and strong have me torn up inside? A tear followed by more tears escaped my eyes as I squeezed them together tighter in hopes of stopping the steady stream now soaking my pillow. Feeling stupid and used by love, I gave in to the raw emotions building inside of me. After another soul-cleansing cry, I glanced at my phone. I had 72 missed calls and 209 unanswered texts from the last 5 days since I've been running from the world. I knew a couple of them were from my mama since she can sense when something is wrong with her baby boy. Have I really been drowning in my sorrows behind a fragile love with glass affections? Too mentally weak to respond to any of my notifications on my phone. I tossed it on the other side of the bed with no interest as to where it landed. The last time I had interest to do anything was 5 nights ago when I pleaded for a position in her heart and in her life. When did the tables turn that I was cut from the shards of glass affections from fragile love? Replaying the events in my mind of what landed me in this bed, I vividly recall the night I met her. It was a cold January night where the wind was blowing so strongly it cut through the night sky. I worked 65 hours for 2 weeks straight and I was exhausted from everything involving those weeks. The takeout from multiple restaurants tasted the same. Each night of sleep felt like the night before, where I only slept for 5 minutes. The coffee tasted bland each morning and my workout routines didn't give me the energy to pass my front door. I don't know if I wore black suits each day to work or if I chose a variety of other colors to wear. My suitcase was an extension of my body since it was within 2 feet of me during that time. My mind was in overdrive as we had 2 influential clients' projects with the same deadline. Before she and her fragile love with glass affections came into my life, I think I dozed off in the shower that Friday night. I was exhausted from looking at blueprints and all of its revisions. I dreamed the clients rejected the perfect proposals, and I had to repeat the last 3 months of work. I glanced at the clock several times once the sun started to rise the next morning. I really needed to work out this morning since I skipped the gym from the demands at work the last 2 weeks. My bed held me hostage, and I succumbed to its demands without a fight. When I finally decided I had enough sleep, the growl from my stomach echoed loudly through my condo. How long have I been asleep? The ringing of my phone brought me out of my half-sleep trance. I immediately recognized the number. Catching up with one of my homeboys from college was always a great time. Since several of us were free that night, we decided to go to the newly opened Grown and Sexy lounge in town. All the reviews about this place raving and the lines were around the block with people waiting to enter. That night was no exception, and we waited 30 minutes to enter the lounge. Immediately, I was impressed by the lounge's atmosphere and all the beautiful people it attracted. The lights were low, the music was dope, and the dance floor was crowded. Waiting to get my round of drinks out the way, I headed to the bar and placed the usual order for the crew. I giggled to myself because we've been friends for 20 years and nobody's drinking preference has changed. As I waited on the bartender to return with our drinks, I saw the most beautiful creature I ever seen and I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She was on the dance floor with two ladies who looked to be her sisters and a group of other beautiful ladies dancing to the latest line dance song. The way she swayed her hips and perked her lips, her moves caught my attention immediately. As soon as I put our drinks down at our table, I had to meet this lady. I sipped on my crisp cold beer and watched how this captivating lady commanded the room with her mannerism. She was absolutely beautiful the way she carried herself. She had on a tight black dress and showed the right amount of thighs that got me excited. The jacket she wore over her dress told me she was a lady of class, and a nightclub wouldn't change how she presented herself to the world. Those 3-inch heels she wore sealed the deal for me. She looked to be 5'5" with the prettiest light brown skin. Thinking I am just as extraordinary as she is, I made my move before she left with her girls. I quickly walked up to her side of the club with no pickup line or pre-played conversation in mind. This lady didn't deserve any lines I'd use on another lady, or any pickup line I ever thought of before this moment. The club was dark and a little smoky from the effects the DJ used to make his music seem a little more appealing. The facade didn't dull the radiance coming from her smile. I found myself smiling like a chess cat as I talked to her for the rest of the night. My intentions were to lead her to the dance floor after getting her attention, just to have her closer to me, feet away from her now. I smiled at her as she turned to face me and she smiled back. I extended my hand, introduced myself, and said, "It's nice to meet you." She grabbed my hand and seductively told me her name. The vibe between us was so strong. We exchanged numbers to keep in touch. Somehow I missed the yellow neon sign that flashed. Warning, she is capable of only fragile love with glass affections. Months turned into a year, and I began to know her deeper than any other interest I had in my life. When things are going great for me in my personal life, my past or current lives always have a way of catching up to me. All of my troubles begin one night after going on a date with her, interrupting the smooth R&B music playing throughout the sound system in my car. An incoming call displayed on the dashboard screen with a phone number that was very familiar to me, ending the call from a button on the steering wheel. I knew I would have to face the skeletons in my closet. Trying to remain cool, I didn't acknowledge the phone call in hopes she wouldn't say anything wrong. Her questions were so direct, I couldn't think of a lie or a believable story that can cover up or explain my after-hours phone call. I hesitantly answered her questions with spacing in between my words to avoid trapping myself. She told me to stop before she lose respect for me, and I instantly knew our relationship changed. The car ride home was miserable, and for the first time I couldn't read the vibes from my lady. The radio echoed louder inside the car, and the street lights flashed brighter inside the car. It was as if the music and stoplights knew I was busting. I thought the secret of me having another lover would go to the grave with me, since she never pressed me about who I was with or where I was going ever. Splitting my time between two beautiful ladies didn't mean my love was fragile laced with glass affections for either of them. I gave both ladies the best of me within reasonable limits when I was with them. Now I stand at a crossroad that I created powerless and with no control. Before the car came to a complete stop, she jumped out and slammed the door. I don't like seeing anyone hurting, especially me, behind my actions. I raced to her side of the car, hoping to reach her before she reached her doorsteps. I've been in this position countless times when a lady screamed the very same words to me. "I don't want to ever see you again." But those words never stung like this before. Now with the truth of who I was and what I've been up to standing between us like an uninvited guest, I was paralyzed as to what to say. Tears choked her words as she snatched from my embrace. I followed her up the steps before I decided to let things settle down that night, and before she slammed the door in my face. Days seemed like eternities before she would take my phone call. She calmly said we needed to talk, and I asked if I could come over that night. I suggested we can go to her favorite restaurant. have dinner and some wine to lessen the tension this conversation was surely to bring. She discarded and told me she thought privacy would be best. I played every possible scenario in my mind as to how the night would end. Would I end up with just one of my ladies in my life? Or would I end up in her bed wrapped up around her with all forgotten and forgiven? Only time would tell, and I hoped Cupid was on my side that night. Before I walked out the door to her house, I planned the route to pick up her favorite wine, her favorite chocolate, and a little I'm sorry gift, and still be on time. I was nervous because I felt it like I was walking into a lion's den instead of one of my lady's houses. I took deep breaths to calm my nerves, and I reminded myself this lady loved me and was just crazy about me as I was about her. I listened to my go-to playlist in the car, and I felt better about the conversation I was going to have with her. I wasn't ready to leave my other lady, but I was willing to do whatever it took to keep her in my life. She might not demand anything since she and I had the conversation about my past and the playthings I had in it. She was extremely nervous, just like I was again. When I walked through her front door, she had soft music playing, and I could smell her favorite candle lingering in the air. She prepared dinner after I offered 100 times to stop for takeout. This lady was so amazing and was still willing to prepare dinner after our breakup. We talked, we made promises, set new ground rules, enjoyed a warm bath. I rubbed her feet, and we brought in a new day celebrating our relationship. Our breakup would soon be a thing of our past, and so was my other relationship. If I wanted to keep her according to our new rules, what was I worried about? Or should I have seen what was coming? Was the writing on the wall to prevent me from laying in the bed today reminiscing other fragile love with glass affection? As she slept peacefully, my mind ran to the other side of town where my other lady was. I couldn't deny the physical connection I had with her, and it was like no physical connection I have ever had with anyone. Our souls were attracted to each other with a magnetic force that neither of us could explain. I never figured out if what we had was real or if our physical connection was fragile love with glass affections. We enjoyed the ride of our mutual understanding of not defining us with titles or labels and not asking questions when we're not together. This relationship worked perfectly for the busy lifestyle I live. Now approaching 35, it was probably time for me to settle down with just one lady. I thought I made progress when I settled down with just two. The next morning, we skipped our usual Saturday morning walk, run in the park. We often did when we both had time. The reconnection last night felt so great, and new beginnings were ahead of us. I knew what my heart and mind felt, but I couldn't let go of the different vibe from her. She seemed so closed off and guarded, yet she did it with her same smile. Her eyes were not as warming and caring as they usually were. I chalked it up, knowing she was still hurt by my actions and our new agreement would take time. Every time I caught a glimpse of her eyes, the sickening feeling grew deeper in the pit of my stomach. There was no need to worry about all minor details right now as long as we were on a good path to recovery. I asked her if we were good throughout the morning, and she assured me we were fine. Months went by, and all seemed forgiven by her, and we fell into a new groove, which was better than before. I was proud to say I was truly a ladies' man, and I no longer offered fragile love with glass affections to anyone. One night after dancing the night away with my lady, I told her I loved her, and I see a promising future between us. What I didn't tell her was I planned the perfect proposal on her upcoming birthday. As we overlooked the balcony, somewhere exotic, I would get on my knee and I asked her to marry me. I couldn't decide between 3 of the rings that I picked out, so I would reach out to her best friend for help. Getting her dad's permission for his daughter's hand in marriage would be the last thing to make this a perfect birthday for me and her. Things were amazing at work and at home, and I couldn't be happier. I've never experienced this type of stability in my personal life, and I have to admit, it felt good. Who was this new version of me? And could I trust this version of me even if I don't recognize me? A couple of days before her birthday, I opened the front door of her place. Laughter and music greeted me as I turned the knob. I could have gone to my place and showered before coming over if I knew she was entertaining that evening. I peeked my head in the dining room and spoke to my lady and her friends. After I put my gym bag and jacket away, I decided to get a beer and find something on TV before I showered. Walking down the hallway, I noticed all the laughter had stopped and the mood in the house had shifted. Obviously, they were whispering about the latest gossip one of them heard. As I turned to head back to the room so I wouldn't invade their privacy, her best friend's voice rose a little higher and more aggressively than I think she meant for it. I heard her tell my lady, "Imagine how I felt helping him pick out a ring for you when I know your secret." My legs wanted to continue to move in the opposite direction of them or maybe out the door, but they were glued to the floor. I remember thinking, should I walk in the dining room to interrupt their conversation to keep my perfect relationship intact? It was hard to unhear the whispers that carried the secrets she was hiding from me. She walked in her bedroom to ask me if she could bring me anything and told me her girls would be leaving soon. I told her don't send her girls away, and I was just going to go home for the night. Instantly knowing I heard that conversation, she excused herself to dismiss her friends. I heard whispers amongst them again, and the house went quiet. What had she been up to? And I would be able to forgive her. My heart shattered at the thought of this being another fragile love with glass affection moment. The only problem was this time I was the one getting cut. She started the conversation by saying she wasn't looking for what we developed when we met. I aggressively told her to get to the point because I was getting agitated by her stalling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she carefully explained her story of deception. This didn't supposed to happen to me. Being a man with the best features and the perfect height, I never had a problem attracting ladies or any kind of propositions. Depending on the way the wind blew, I indulged in some, if not at all, of the demands circling the air that night. I was carefree and avoided of any situation where I was not offering fragile love with glass affections. I was crushing the architectural business world while pursuing my own successful part-time art design company. I had an eye for illustrating exactly what customers wanted, and I went the extra mile to give it to them, far from being an average man. I had my own accolades hanging on my walls in the office and the home to prove just that. I acknowledged my talent when rendering my service to my customers, but I reminded humble enough not to bring to my family and friends. Can fragile love with glass affections happen to a man like me? I pulled in front of my log cabinet tucked away deep in the woods, where only 8 people knew it existed. As my car dashboard said, it was 15 minutes after midnight. My homeboys and I brought this getaway spot for moments like this, I guessed. I rushed through the door to find the bar fully stocked, opened the first bottle of hard liquor I could find, and straight to my lips the bottle went. I hoped the smooth brown liquor would dull the pain taking over my soul. The conversation with her had me shook as I found myself begging on my knees for hours for this lady not to leave me. I was sure we could work something out to make this situation work for all parties involved except her husband. How could I ever touch, kiss, dance, dinner, walk in the park, be fragile love with glass affections? She explained her husband was overseas working and this relationship between us meant everything to her. She was lonely and I came into her life at the right time. She wanted to tell me since the night the infamous call showed up on my car's dashboard, but she didn't want a tick-for-tat situation. Her girls' trip were to connect with her husband when she traveled domestically and internationally. How could I not see? I was being lied to. This is what I do, and not what gets done to me. I refused to believe our love was fragile with glass affections. I fought for our relationship literally on my knees with my arms wrapped around her waist. I am embarrassed of how I tried to stop this lady from choosing him, her very own husband. If I would have never heard the whispers of her friends, I would be an engaged man enjoying my fiancée somewhere overlooking downtown. I finally faced I was losing the battle of keeping her in my life, and I gave her back her marriage without me. She repetitively told me she couldn't continue seeing both of us because things are too deep for her, and she had to choose her marriage. I never knew that fragile love with glass affections felt like, or the pain that came with it. I seen my homeboys fall victim to it over and over again from our childhood until now, but never me. This is the very reason I carried myself the way I did before her. Impenetrable walls with no emotions shield me from the pain I am experiencing at this very moment. She was the first lady I ever gave my heart, and fragile love with glass affections laced with deception and lies caused me to run away from the world. Her vows to another man landed me in a cabin tucked away in the woods where no one can find me. Screaming, why without an ear to hear me? I vow to return to my old ways. Right now, I take my name out of the pot for love and the happily ever after. I don't need the house on the hill with the picket fence, protecting my son and daughter playing in the yard. Fragile love with glass affections destroyed any future that kind of life had for me. My half-drunken bottle of liquor and my old lifestyle with fragile love with glass affections awaits me later this morning or afternoon or whenever I woke up again. Sleeping off the slumber I put myself in, I wake the next morning with hazy, glazed eyes and wondered exactly where I was before the ache in my heart reminded me of the recent events. I wanted to forget. You have just heard a written piece by publisher and best-selling author, poet Katrina McCain. And this wonderful piece titled Fragile Love with Glass Affections was narrated by the poet B.GKL. Brotha GKL, that is Gawd, Keenng, Lio'lf.